to this month's episode of Associations Now Presents, an original podcast series from the American Society of Association Executives. I'm Catherine Galli, digital content writer at the International Coaching Federation. Today, we're excited to welcome Wendy-Jo Toyama, CEO of the American Epilepsy Society, and Megan Henshall, Chief Impact Officer at the Neu Project. Welcome, Wendy-Jo and Megan. Today, we're discussing the joint report through the ASAE Foundation and MPI Foundation, Enhancing Neuroinclusive Practices in Association, of course, which was done in partnership with Bergson and the Neu Project. For those who may be new to the term, let's just dive right in. How do you define neuroinclusion, and why is it especially relevant for associations right now?
At the Neu Project, we define neurodiversity is all of us, right? We all have a brain. Some brains are quote unquote neurotypical, some brains are neurodivergent, but there are billions of neurotypes and combinations of different ways of thinking and cognitive function. And so neurodiversity really speaks to all of us. And I think we're going to dig into sort of the neurodivergent experience in this conversation today, but it really is important to note that it is speaking to brain health across everyone and how we support people with cognitive functioning, sensory processing, regardless of their neurotype.
Yeah, and then taking it to the next step, neuroinclusion then would be creating that sense of belonging so that everyone can feel seen and heard. So creating an environment that really embraces that neurological difference. And I think it's particularly important because, as Meg said, it cuts across all aspects of associations. And so we have members who are affected by practices that are either barriers or neuroinclusive. We have staff. So it's really important to build this, to be able to be effective and welcoming and create a sense of belonging for everyone.
Thank you. That's a great explanation. And I think it really centers everybody into the topic today. So in the associations industry, this report on neuroinclusion is the first. What are some of the most surprising or unexpected findings that emerged from the data?
I will just start by saying I think associations have a long way to go on being a welcoming environment around disabilities in general. And so I think what surprised me is that there are some things that are going well, or, that strengths we can build on. Like, I think it was not as bleak as I thought it was maybe going to be. Like that for me, there are places that things are happening that we can build on. So that was one surprise to me.
One of the things that jumped out to me when we did the individual interviews, and we interviewed sort of samples across the entire association population, but in a particular interview with a senior leader, so executives, there was a comment made of like, I don't think this affects my particular organization. Everyone in my organization is very like high functioning and right. So that was, it's not terrible.
There is that as well. Yes.
I hear it all the time because, I travel constantly and talk with a bunch of different types of organizations and in different industries about, neurodiversity, neuroinclusion, neuroinformed design. Mm-hmm. And I hear it a lot. There is still a lot of misunderstanding and stigma around what a neurodivergent person is and how they present. And so I think one of the biggest sort of aha moments from any of these conversations, not just the brilliant work that we've done with ASAE and MPI, is that there are neurodivergent people in every room. And a lot of this is completely invisible.
Yes.
And so it's really important to know that. And until that sort of awareness exists in your body, it's really hard to support it, accommodate, and advocate for it.
Yeah, that was shocking when I read that finding. The other place that I was surprised about, and I think we probably need to dig in a little bit more, is there's a pretty big gap between member perceptions and staff perceptions. Mm-hmm. So that was interesting, and I'm not sure that came out, and it will need more exploration, I think.
It's interesting that you note visibility in there. And Wendy-Jo, you mentioned the connection to inclusive design and making things inclusive for people with different disabilities. And I think you've also tied it into inclusion in other topics within associations. I love that this study really tries to look at all of the different levels and how that fits within members, their experiences at different events, and then also for staff themselves. And you mentioned this gap between staff and members. When you compare those perspectives, where do you see the biggest disconnects in how neuroinclusion is experienced?
This is a constant thing too. What we saw in the ASAE research is no different than most other organizations who are on a journey to try to implement a neuroinclusive practice. I think a lot of times we educate ourselves, we build an awareness, then we start to implement practices or tactics, and yet we don't storytell around those things and we don't co-create with the people that we're building for it. This is like a real challenge across all design practices, not just this one. But I think a lot of times people, especially event people who are all heart, right? Like we care so much about others. We're doing these things in service of others, yet we're not talking about the real intention and thought and care behind those things. And we're not asking for feedback and conversation and dialogue around them when we do try them. So it's really hard to learn and it's really hard to iterate and get better. But it's interesting because staff are like, no, we're doing the thing. It's really hard to make it as impactful as possible unless we're inviting the people that it's for into the conversation and iterating, co-creating, evolving with them. So it's really interesting to watch how that's always sort of a part of any journey with this work. But it's a really critical part of the journey.
And Meg, I think when I look at the page that really calls out this gap between leaders and members, members perceive us being further along than the staff do. And I think it's related to the journey. Like, I think where it is closest is things around being supportive, creating intention. But where the gaps are the largest, they're sort of like when you put it into action. So I think, allocating resources to support neuroinclusive initiatives, there's a huge gap between what members think and what staff think on that front. There's a huge gap between development programs and training around neurodiversity awareness and understanding. There's a gap around actively involving neuro-inclusive initiatives into your plan. So I think it's kind of a journey gap, if you will.
It's interesting to hear both you, Wendy-Jo, and Meg, you've mentioned that there's this communication gap as well of we're trying to implement these neuro-inclusive practices and yet nobody knows that they're being implemented, or perhaps members are not able to find the information they need. Can you explain that gap a little bit more?
Well, I can speak to our experience working with companies and also, my own experience advocating for myself. So I got diagnosed with autism at 40 after my son was diagnosed at 3. So this has been a professional journey for me, but also a very personal one. But I think there's a lot of fear around work like this. And there's a lot of hesitation to lean in because what if we get it wrong? Or what if we try something that actually isn't helpful? And I think that is why a lot of organizations or just people hesitate or struggle to openly and transparently communicate around what they're doing and why. I also think there's this cancel culture and, asking a question and it not being the right question has created a lot of harm in work like this. And so I think that's one of the cultural and societal issues with this. And I hear leaders say it all the time of like, I really want to do something about this. I'm afraid of getting it wrong and actually making things worse. But the truth of the matter is, if you approach this sort of work with humility and you're honest and transparent about what you're doing, people are grateful. They're grateful every time. Now, you might get some critical feedback or you might get feedback that you weren't expecting at all, but that just makes us all better. And so, in my opinion, macro level, I think this is one thing that impacts people's ability to communicate effectively is just this hesitation that what if I use the wrong word? Or what if I'm not knowledgeable enough? Like, no one is an expert in neuroinclusion. It is a real-time dynamic practice. We are learning more about the human brain every day. We're learning more about how that brain is evolving in real time. So you can't possibly be an expert. We're all learning. We should be learning openly and together.
I want to build on that and say, when I became a CEO, I had a strong membership background. I had an MBA. I was pretty comfortable with finance. I didn't know meetings so well, and I certainly didn't know publishing. But that didn't mean that I didn't do those things because I didn't know and I was afraid of making a mistake. So I think that then you think about, well, what did I do? I reached out to someone I knew who was our editor at the place I worked before. I gained knowledge. I engaged consultants. These are all things you can do around neuroinclusion. And you can certainly start by looking at the research. There's some good articles in there, but saying I'm afraid of making a mistake is not an excuse for equipping yourself to being able to create a welcoming environment around this. The other thing I would say is something that I noticed when I was reading the report. There's a lot in here around intention. And so again, not just creating a pathway for people to get an accommodation if they need it, but to actually designate somebody who may be an ambassador or someone that you can put out that folks can proactively reach out to. So again, shifting from sort of a compliance culture, like, sure, if you ask, we'll do it, to one that says, hey, are there accommodations you need around neurodiversity? And if there are, here's the pathway for that. That's huge. And really, the implementation is the same. You'll still make the accommodation. It's all about the front end and how you make it visible, easy, and begin to take away the stigma around it, right?
So, for association leaders who are wanting to begin this journey, I like that you're starting to mention the skills transferability of leaders are always having to learn new things and they're always having to apply new things. Just to give our listeners some examples, what are a few simple, high impact changes that event planners can make to create more neuro-inclusive environments?
So I just attended a large 11,000 person meeting. I was there all day. I do not identify as neurodivergent. And yet when I got home, I'm a little introverted. When I got home, I was just done. And so I know some meetings, ours included, are trying to create a quiet place, a space where people during the meeting can go and take a break. And it's quiet, it's away from the hubbub. It's created with intention, though, not just sort of like, here's a room. So I think that's one thing I would say I am beginning to see implemented at meetings, and I think it's very good.
I couldn't agree more about resilient spaces. I'll give you a funny anecdote. We were at a large culture festival in Texas. I'll let you do with that what you will.
Yeah.
And they had resilient spaces, and my partner in this work, Rachel Lowenstein, and I walked in just to check it out. We're like so curious, and it was like an inflatable.
No.
Yes, it was an inflatable, almost like a kid's bounce house in the room. And so you had the fan going, which is like
Oh my God.
immediate sensory nightmare. The touch of the rubber thing, it was just so not it. So I think there's a lot of, for resilient spaces, I think there's a lot of mental mapping we've done that like they need to be juvenile and they're for children, but like adults need these spaces in many ways more than kids do because we don't take care of ourselves and we largely just like we don't take care of each other as much as we should. And so that was just like a really funny example of like, ooh, maybe not the best way.
Yeah.
I also think, yeah, it was a funny moment. I also think like there's this mindset in the event industry and experience design industry at large that like the flashier, the louder,
Activation.
the brighter, the more colorful this thing is, the more you're going to capture and keep people's attention. And like we know based on neuroscience, that is not at all true. Where you have high highs, you need low lows. Like people can't sustain high energy all day. They actually can't sustain attention. We have the human attention span is actually now less than a goldfish. Thank you, social media.
Yeah.
So like we really need to give people breaks. We need to facilitate transitions and give them permission and alibis to go and process and regulate and restore. And sometimes that can be as simple as just giving longer breaks.
Yeah.
They can find their own way. I think giving intentionally designed spaces is really beautiful, but understanding budget constraints and things, like just give them more time to process between things. And like, think about how we attenuate and amplify at the right times. Like if you want to do the loud music and the flashing lights, like cool, choose your moment for that and know that you also need to provide an alternative, a counterpoint to that at another point in time, because people need both. If you want the most out of them, you need to make sure that you're supporting how their brain works.
And that's not even a neurodivergent challenge. That's just a people challenge. I remember going to a 3-day conference that was basically a rave for 3 straight days, and leaving and being very overwhelmed.
Yeah. And that speaks to universal design, right? The idea that a lot of times these considerations that get put in place for one purpose end up benefiting everybody.
I planned the conferences for decades. And I would come home from running an event and I would go nonverbal and I would be in bed for 2 days. And at the time I thought like, I'm just exhausted. No, I was actually having a full autistic shutdown. And now I know how to moderate. But like, there's a lot of things that I go to because I have to for work or I need to be there to speak. And they're really untenable for me and a lot of people.
So you mentioned some of the things that are supportive in events for being able to be more accessible, not just for neurodivergent individuals, but for everyone. What are some of the ways that associations can better support their neurodivergent members, whether that's volunteering, leadership roles, or even committee participation?
We recently had a strategic planning session, and I really appreciated our consultant who we brought in to facilitate that because she did very thoughtful things around this. So, it would be typical that they might throw out a question to a group, talk about how X is affecting the field. But she also included, I want everybody to think for the next 2 minutes. Let's not talk, let's just think, take out a piece of paper and write down how the external environment is affecting your association. And I really appreciated that. It gave folks who are not think talkers, the chance to kind of gather their thoughts. I think though there's little things like that we can do. That was really helpful for a group that I'm sure included neurodivergent folks.
One of the reasons I loved the approach to this project we did with ASAE and MPI is it started with curiosity and listening. And I really believe curiosity is like a dying human practice because now we can, Gemini or Chat GPT, anything, and we don't talk to one another anymore. And I think any organization that really wants to get this right, they have to start with listening and a really deep spirit of curiosity to understand the experience of the people that ultimately they serve or building for or designing for. And I'm always really proud to be a part of a project that or a journey, right, that starts that way. So I think just it's as simple as asking, people on your team, how do you best like to receive information? What is your communication style and how can I accommodate the ways that you learn or you process information? Cool. Tell me a little bit about your chronotype. Like what are the parts of your day where you're peak creative and how can we lean into that? I think, this idea of like job crafting and things in the future, leaning like strengths-based work and just building together collaboration is going to be more important than ever in a post AI world. And so like curiosity is not something that AI can replace. Bravery to ask the question is not something that AI can ever replace. And so these are the human things. This is very human work, right? These are the human things that we need to recultivate. And guess what? They're free and they're simple. So I really do think that's the best first step for anyone who wants to get into this work.
So interesting to hear you talk about it, Meg, because at the organization I'm at, the American Epilepsy Society, our members are really curious, no surprise. And so we bring a lot of curiosity into our association and into our work. We also talk about neurodivergence at the board table as well as with staff. And I think, again, normalizing it, bringing curiosity helps us think about how to curate and design a meeting or a day in a way that takes that into account and doesn't make it something that's odd or stigmatized or negative. Yeah. Inviting
Yeah.
it into the room.
Yeah, we're not robots, right? Like we all have different needs and it's so important. And once you like throw it out there, people are like, oh, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it creates such rich
Right.
conversation. It's
Right.
it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. There's no IEP for adulthood. So,
Right. Ugh, don't I know it?
yeah. So we have to figure out how we carry on
Right.
that, creating an environment where everyone can bring their best self.
That's wonderful. And even just framing it within curiosity takes away some of the fear for people who are trying to jump into this
Yeah.
space, to say that, okay, I'm going to get it wrong, but I want to learn, and I can learn with the people that I work with and the people that I serve together. That's wonderful. So, we've talked about this idea of stepping into starting these practices. I like that the research kind of sets a baseline for neuroinclusive practice and associations. Going off of that, what guidance would you offer to leaders to measure and improve neuroinclusion in their organizations?
I mean, I can jump in. I think when you're doing, again, very deeply human work like neuroinformed design and neuroinclusive practice, I think understanding sentiment is one of the most important things, because again, like this isn't data on a spreadsheet. This is lived experience and this is like human beings' everyday lives. And so I think, again, creating a really robust feedback channel that is open and transparent is critical for this sort of work. As you implement, you ask, how did that land? How did that feel? Was that helpful? How could it be more helpful? And I know we're all like survey fatigued, but it doesn't have to be a survey, right? It can be an individual conversation. It can be observational audit, right? Just to see how people are engaging with the thing that you tried. We've done this a multitude of ways in the Neu Project. At one point, we brought in behavioral and organizational scientists, and they did an observational audit and helped us iterate and improve. So I think there are a lot of different ways that you can do this that aren't as potentially annoying or invasive as a survey, but the feedback loop, people seeing you responding to their feedback and then coming back to them, is like, it's just so kind, and it's just one of the most impactful things that you can do. It is very hard to boil this down to like 2 KPIs, but once you have that feedback loop in place, the story writes itself. And then I think you can plug out certain data points or, positive or negative side effects of various interventions. So you can build from there. But that feedback channel is really important.
I love your answer because it is very personal and actionable. I will also say, I do think you could use proxies, right? So I do think that ideally, if you are being inclusive of all your employees and neuro-inclusive, you might see employee engagement scores go up. You might see your employee retention go up. You might see your member retention or your net promoter score go up. So I think there are other proxies you can look at. You may not be able to draw a straight line. And of course, these kinds of efforts take time. So that's why I like augmenting proxies with what you're talking about. I love the experience audit idea. And I also think there are questions we can ask, like, does everyone feel like they belong? Do you feel like you can express your opinion? Do you feel heard? Like, I think there are questions that sometimes feel like soft questions, but they really aren't anymore, right? Like, we're learning that what leaders need is kind of shifting and evolving, and these are essential skills. But there are questions you could incorporate into something else you're doing, right? To your point, Meg, people are tired of surveys, but so I think figuring out what you're currently doing and how you can just tweak it a little to get a little information could be helpful.
Yeah, I'll give a really tangible example of, based on feedback and sentiment, we're partnering with an organization. We heard we need something intentional and designed to lower stress and anxiety in this particular environment. And so we created an intervention based on the feedback. We implemented it. And then we actually tracked some biometric data. We had a user experience team come in and conduct interviews and started with feedback, did this intervention, and actually ended up with this incredible data around how this intervention had lowered stress and anxiety rates by like 60%.
Oh, cool. That's so amazing.
The teams felt more creative post intervention, and they actually felt more productive for up to 4 hours afterwards. And so it was really interesting. Like, we didn't know exactly what we would learn, but we knew we were solving a real problem that we had heard right from the people we cared about. And so this is just like a very tangible example of how that can manifest. Like, you don't always know exactly what KPI you're going to end up with, but if you're doing the right thing with the right intention, you'll prove yourself right with the data.
And, here's what I heard. I didn't hear, oh my gosh, I have to bring in a behavioral health scientist to measure this. What I heard is, oh, she listened to her, audience, made changes, and it was effective. like that's the part of your answer that I heard that feels very implementable, right? Because again, we don't want to not do it because, I can't have someone come in and measure it. I don't have the money to do that. So I'm not going to do it at all. You can still do it. And guess what? You'll still get a result even if you're not measuring it.
Yeah, I think sometimes we get so hamstrung, like we're in a prison of data necessity.
Yeah. I love
that. There's this really great saying, like the same hammer can build a cathedral or a prison. And I think a lot of times we will data that way, like box ourselves in.
Right.
Just do something because it's the right thing to do and it's needed. And I guarantee you the data will come.
Yeah. It's like being at the conference the other day and I didn't have my watch on, so I couldn't count my steps. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, yeah, but I guess I'm still taking them all, so it still counts, whether or not I measured it.
I have the Oura ring, and sometimes it's very self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm like, oh, I'm not well today. So.
I know.
So then for organizations considering getting involved or sponsoring this type of research, what's the real value, both for the organization and the broader community?
Ultimately, creating a sense of belonging is going to be beneficial on so many different fronts, from including all voices, different voices, people wanting to be a part of your association, working or as members, so many different benefits.
Yeah. As someone who regularly says that my autistic special interest is people, I'm often like completely befuddled by this mindset of like, we want to sell you something, we want to get something from you, yet we're not going to take the time to understand you and meet you where you are. And I think, like we talk about neuroinclusion as, it's not just the right thing to do, it's also like a strategic imperative. Now to understand people. I mean, there was a really interesting study that came out last year from our friends at understood.org. Like 52% of Gen Z, decent sample size, identifies neurodivergent.
Sure.
And so it's just really interesting to think like there's this whole swath of people that most organizations know very little about, not only how to support them and accommodate them, but also how to get the most out of them, how to help them meet their potential, or how to sell them something even, right? And so I think it's really important that when you're designing or you're looking to target people, that you do everything you can to understand them, because that's going to help you get the messaging right. That's going to help you create the right design interventions. And ultimately, it creates a really virtuous cycle, right? I understand you. I do the right thing for you. You give back. It creates reciprocity, and it's not as extractive. So I just think it's a really important part of business, like good business practice.
It's essential.
Yeah.
I love that. And I love hearing just this idea that one, it's about being a good steward of resources and being a good steward of people, treating people with respect and kindness and inviting them to engage on all these different levels, but also just a strategic imperative that the future of work demands that associations or really any organization be prepared for these changes that are happening and be able to work with future staff and future members who may identify as neurodivergent. So I really like that this research is coming in now because I think it's a great place to sort of spark those conversations and to prepare associations for a future like that. And for people right now who are navigating these different events and leadership positions, committee participation, and wanting to show up as their best selves. We talked about the research. We talked about ways to make events a little bit more inviting. That first step can be really challenging. If an association wanted to get started with neuroinclusion today, but didn't know where to begin, what's the first step you recommend they take?
Well, I wouldn't boil the ocean. And I think if you haven't stated an intention, I think that's a place to start, but you do need to follow it with action. You don't want to be performative in the space. I think one of the things that you could do is begin a conversation with your staff about this. You may not know who identifies as neurodivergent. And if somebody steps forward, then that might be someone you could co-create with. So that might be a way to start by bringing it into the room, having the conversation, having, bias for us kind of discussion, and identifying something that would be meaningful and doable and sustainable.
I love that answer. Yeah, look around where you are and invite neurodivergent people. They're there.
They
Invite
are.
to the process.
Yeah.
One thing, so I said earlier, like start with listening. I think listening to people in your own organization is a beautiful way to get started there. I will counter to like, here's what not to do. Do not hire a neurodivergent speaker, especially if you're not compensating them fairly. Have them come talk about their lived experience and then do nothing afterwards. Like that is so icky.
Formative. It's
Yeah.
opportunistic.
I see it happening all the time. And people are like, we did it. We checked the box. We educated people. Like a 30-minute keynote at a conference where someone is talking about their disability is not it. So like, don't do that. But I actually don't think there's any wrong way to start as long as you're doing it from an earnest, honest place and you're curious. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. And is there anything else you want our listeners to know about enhancing neuroinclusion in their practices and associations?
One of the things we haven't talked about that I do want to mention is intersectionality. And I do think that if you are someone who identifies as a person of color, or female in a male environment, male in a female environment, you might closet your neurodivergence. And so, again, I think it's important for leaders to understand that this is happening. That when you say, I don't have anyone neurodivergent on my staff, you probably do. There's probably intersectionality happening there, and they don't want to be an Asian woman and neurodivergent. So I think that's really important to be aware of. And again, I think what Meg's been talking about, being curious and listening, I think those are some of the ways that you can try to tease this out. But it's a real anxiety, stressful producing situation to be in as an individual. If you feel you have to hide part of who you are because, oh gosh, I have this other stuff going on. So I just think it's important that people are aware of that. I'm not actually sure what to tell you to do about that, but be aware of it and continue to be curious and listen.
Yeah, like less than 30%. I think it's like 27% is the latest stat of people disclose that they're neurodivergent at work or in mixed spaces, right? Where they don't have really trusted people around. So, and a lot of people are undiagnosed.
Sure.
They need this work. They need this work and they just don't know they need it. So yeah, I mean, I'll give it a quick plug. We have free resources on the Neu Project website. It's just the Neu Project, neuproject.com. And there are free resources there specifically for event planners because we know events are one of the most stressful things for neurodivergent people. A lot of them don't go. And so they're missing out on professional opportunities and networking opportunities that matter to them and their careers and their growth and their ability to contribute. So like, go check that out. Like those will always be free. And, I think, well, I can't speak for Wendy-Jo, but like, if you have questions and you just want to unpack things with a safe person, I'm always open. So you can contact the team at the Neu Project through the website, and stay curious.
And ASAE's, the resource with MPI and ASAE has practical actions in it. It has links to articles in it. And I believe toolkits will be coming out as well. So, again, I think now that you've heard about neuroinclusion and neurodiversity, you're probably going to find a number of places you can turn. It wasn't on your radar screen maybe before, but now it is. So there are resources out there.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Meg and Wendy-Jo. Thanks to everybody listening to this episode of Associations Now Presents. Join us each month to explore key topics relevant to association professionals, discuss the challenges and opportunities in the field today, and highlight the significant impact associations have on the economy, the U.S., and the world. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And for more information on topics impacting the association space, visit Associations Now online at associationsnow.com.